Chapter 16, Move 37. Chapter 16, Move 37. Beyond Islam and unbelief, there is a desert plain. For us, there is a passion in the midst of that expanse. Rumi, Quatrain 395, Trans, Ibrahim Gamard. Game 1 began with ceremony. Soul treated the match like weather and war at once. Something you couldn't stop. Something you could pretend to be ready for. The venue was clean and overlit. A room designed to look neutral while history happened inside it. Cameras nested in corners. Microphones waited. The clock sat there, patient and cruel. Outside the building, people gathered with phones held up like small prayers. Inside, the press room filled early. The match was not just a game. It was a referendum the world wanted to watch in real time. Sedol had smiled in interviews the way champions smile when they are asked to carry myth. He had offered confidence because confidence was part of the job. He had spoken as if victory were the default state of a human in his position. He sat down for Game 1 with the calm posture that had outlasted other humans for years. Across from him was an absence with a sponsor logo. Beyond the glass, reflections moved. Engineers with headsets, screens full of telemetry he couldn't read, eyes fixed on the board like medics watching a monitor. The opening felt familiar enough to be comforting. That was the trap. It was a mistake. It was not a mistake. It was something for which those words were insufficient. At first, AlphaGo's moves looked merely solid, a strong amateur, a machine with taste. Then, slowly, the texture changed. The opponent did not bluff. It did not hesitate. It did not play for intimidation or applause. It played as if it had no audience and no ego to protect. Lee searched for the human failure mode, the small impatience, the overreach, the late-game panic. He searched for the moment when the machine would reveal itself as something you could outwait. The moment never came. When he lost, it was not with the spectacle of collapse. It was with the quiet horror of inevitability, a position that tightened and tightened until there was nowhere to put hope. In the press room, people reacted the way they always react when a story breaks. Denial first, then frantic explanation. It's only Game 1. It's nerves. It's a fluke. Lee heard the coping narratives and let them sit nearby like spare oxygen tanks. He needed them to keep walking. That night, in his hotel room, he replayed the game on a small travel board. He placed stones and lifted them and placed them again, trying to locate the exact point where the game had turned without his permission. He couldn't find it. The worst part was not that he had lost. The worst part was that the loss did not come with a clean lesson. It did not tell him where to improve in the old way, the way losses to humans always did. In the early hours, Soul kept talking without him. In the lobby bar downstairs, a TV played the recap on a loop. Commentators spoke with the strained cheer of people trying to keep a story alive. A banner at the bottom of the screen made the match look like a sports score, clean and digestible. Lee heard his own name said in the bright voice of a stranger and felt something inside him recoil. His phone buzzed with messages that carried the same shape in different languages. Encouragement that felt like pressure. Confidence offered like a demand. His team left him alone with a kind of careful respect that was also fear. No one wanted to be the person who said the wrong comforting thing to a champion in a new kind of trouble. At 3 a.m, he stopped replaying and sat very still, hands resting on his thighs, staring at the board as if it might speak first. The stones sat there, indifferent. They did not tell him what he had missed. They did not tell him what he could fix. They only told him, quietly, that something had happened without his permission. By the morning of Game 2, the building felt louder. More cameras, more hunger. More of the world pressing its face against the glass. Lee walked into the match room carrying a steadier expression than he felt. A champion's trick. If you can't control the situation, control what the situation thinks you are. Midway through the game, he stood and walked out for a smoke break, as if the air itself might contain advice. When Lee Sedol returned to the room, it felt like the air had been drained and replaced with something thinner. He sat. He stared. The stone waited. The commentators called it an error. Lee tried to believe them. The human mind is desperate for explanations that preserve dignity. But the stone did not become an error. The board had always been a place where time slowed. Now time became a weapon. The clock's digits advanced with a steadiness that felt obscene. Lee could feel the broadcast schedule pressing against the match, the audience's hunger pushing through the walls. The cameras did not blink. They did not look away in kindness. They recorded his uncertainty like a crime. He looked at the stone again and again, searching for a familiar shape, an old proverb, an old pattern, an old story he could tell himself to turn panic into procedure. There was none. The move was not just creative. It was not just weird. Those were human words that implied a human mind taking human risks. This move carried no risk signature Lee could read. It sat on the board with the quiet certainty of a calculation too large to fit inside any one skull. He heard a faint murmur behind the glass, the team shifting, whispering, a chair squeaking. For a moment he hated them, not because they had built something evil, but because they had built something that could do this to him and still sleep at night. Lee's hands hovered above his bowl of stones. He did not touch them. Touching them felt like consent. The commentators continued talking. Urgent now. The way people speak when they realize their authority is about to be revoked. They offered lines and counterlines. They tried to domesticate the move by analyzing it. Lee listened without hearing. Inside him, a colder thought rose. If this move is correct, then the board I learned is not the whole board. The shame of that thought was immediate and physical. The game had been his home. Homes are supposed to be stable. He looked at AlphaGo's face. The absence, the sponsor logo, the stillness. He looked for something human to fight. There was nothing to fight. Only the stone. Only the clock. Lee stood and walked out again. In the hallway, away from cameras, his hands shook. He pressed his fingertips to the wall and tried to find something stable. His whole life had been built on pattern. Now a move had appeared that his body could not digest. There was no ground. He walked. He didn't know where he was going. He only knew he couldn't sit under those lights for another second. The corridor smelled of sanitizer. The building's ventilation hissed softly, indifferent. A staff member glanced at him and immediately looked away, as if eye contact would make them responsible for what was happening. Lee reached a quiet corner near an emergency exit and stood there, breathing, the way he had breathed in childhood tournaments before he knew the word pressure. 15 minutes. That was what the cameras said later. 15 minutes of absence that felt, to him, like falling through a trapdoor. He tried to remember the first time he had ever felt this kind of disorientation, this pure mismatch between intuition and reality. Nothing came. He was not used to being without a story. In his mind, the board replayed itself, the stone sitting there with its alien grammar. He imagined punishing it. He imagined refuting it. He imagined proving to the world, proving to himself, that it was a mistake. But every variation he tried dissolved into fog. He couldn't see the end. He couldn't even see the middle. That was the new terror. Not being worse, but being unable to locate where you were worse. Somewhere behind him, a door opened. Voices. A laugh. Small. Nervous. Then silence again. Lee closed his eyes and let one sentence form, not as philosophy, but as a survival instruction. You cannot win back your old ground. He opened his eyes. He turned. He walked back. He walked back into the room. He sat down to stone. The first move after humiliation is always the hardest. It is a public admission that you are still in the match even after the match has changed. He chose a move that felt safe, not because it was correct, but because it was something his body could do without breaking. The machine responded instantly. The instant response was its own message. Your suffering is not part of my loop. Later, after the move proved itself correct, Lee tried to speak about what he had experienced. Yesterday, I was surprised, but today, I am quite speechless. Speechless, not only because of defeat, because of the encounter with an intelligence that did not share the human need for explanation. And in that speechlessness, Mara recognized the newest kind of terror. The terror of being outclassed by something that does not hate you. Something that does not even notice your dignity. Something that is simply doing the scalable thing. AlphaGo won Game 2. In the hours after, commentators replayed Move 37 the way people replay a violent clip, searching for the frame where the world changed. Some called it genius. Some called it luck. Some insisted it was creative, as if creativity were the only human word big enough to hold an alien result. Lee listened and felt the strange distance between public language and private sensation. The truth was simpler and worse. He had seen something he could not digest, and then it had beaten him anyway. Game 3 arrived like a hangover. The room was the same. The lights were the same. The sponsor logo was the same. The clock clicked forward with the same indifferent patience. Lee sat down and tried to treat it as a normal match again. He tried to find the old rhythm, pressure, release, reading, intuition. But the rhythm had been contaminated. Every time he considered a line, a second voice rose in him. Cold, quiet, humiliating. What if the board is larger than the board I learned? He fought anyway. Champions don't get to pause the world. When he lost Game 3, it did not feel like a new injury. It felt like the same injury deepening. Outside the match room, the world tallied the score the way the world always does when it wants to be done thinking. 3-0. By the time Game 4 arrived, the story the world wanted was narrow enough to be cruel. A miracle or an ending.